In this video, I'd like to introduce the respiratory system, and to do that, I think it's most important to look at structures first. Let me go through this with you. This is the nostrils. Tongue, we don't have to label that, that's not an important feature in the respiratory system. This is worth identifying, this flap of skin. It's on the ventral side. That's the epiglottis. This is the trachea. Most of the respiratory system I put in a purpley color. The rest of the body is primarily in blue. So this is the trachea. The trachea goes down the throat and it branches. Each of these branches is called a bronchus. Two of them are bronchi. As they continue to branch, the smaller branches are called bronchioles. And they end in tiny air sacs, which are called alveoli. There are a couple other features in this diagram and in the respiratory system which should be mentioned, but that's the features that make up the pathway of the air into the body. These other features, there's a membrane that covers the lung surface. This is let's say this is the right lung. That's the left lung there. On the surface of this right lung and on the surface of the left lung, there's a pleural membrane. And then also against the body wall, there's another one. So this is an inner pleural membrane, and then there's an outer pleural membrane. They run against each other. They say there's a space between them called an interpleural space, but there's no appreciable volume to that space, and we'll get to that topic in a little bit here. There's a layer of muscle that runs under this system, and that layer of muscle is the diaphragm. Looks like my pen's dying. This set of circles along the side here, both sides, those are ribs cut in cross section, and between the ribs there's muscle. If you like eating spare ribs, and that's this muscle that you're eating, those muscles are, I'll put them on this side and name on this side, those muscles between the ribs are called the intercostal muscles. So just to look at it, when we breathe in, air comes in our nostrils and our mouth, if our mouth is open, down, past the epiglottis, into the trachea, which branches into the bronchi, branching into the bronchioles and ending in the air sacs. When we breathe out, the air goes out the exact same way. The epiglottis closes, it flaps down when we're swallowing, so food doesn't go down towards your lungs. Food goes down the esophagus, which is right behind here. I should label that, I guess, here. This is the esophagus. So that's what the system looks like. When we're inhaling or exhaling, we have other words that we use to describe the same thing. So I'll put those up here right at the beginning so that when we're getting through this topic, if we happen to use the other terms, it should make sense. But this is called inspiration. It's the same thing. And this is expiration. What I would like to do with this diagram is actually remove it, draw a simplified version of it beside, over on that side there, and then walk you through inspiration and expiration, inhalation and exhalation, and how that changes the air composition as it goes in. So let me just erase this bit here. And if you'll allow me, here's basically the nostrils up here. This is the nose, nostrils. By the time we get past there, we're talking about the trachea. And the trachea branches, obviously, to bronchi. So these are bronchi. And they branch into smaller branches, and smaller branches called bronchioles. And at the end of the bronchioles are the alveoli. In this video, I want to consider specializations in the upper respiratory tract only. So we'll talk about the nose and the trachea, and some of what's true for the trachea relates also to the bronchi and bronchioles. We won't mention anything about alveoli today because that's just too big a topic for one video. So I can take this down now. So here's my diagram. The pathway of air down from out of the body into the body. I just want to make a little connection here for you as well, that this bears a certain resemblance to blood vessels. Just make that little connection, because it starts in one spot, and this could be related to an artery, and this could be related to a capillary. There is no venous system. It doesn't go anywhere else except into blood after this. But there's a connection or sort of a structural similarity to this. It just makes sense that you recognize that sort of thing. The difference being, of course, that this is a blind end. Air comes in, there's an exchange, and then air goes back out. We better look at the composition of air. What's in the air itself. The air we breathe in a lot of oxygen, but oxygen isn't the biggest component of air. We've got nitrogen, which is the biggest component. It's about 78% actually. And oxygen is about 21%. The air we breathe in. And there's a little bit of carbon dioxide in there, a little bit of other gases that are in the air. Water vapor, depending on how arid it is and what the humidity is. But in terms of the gaseous components, that's the part the biggest part. That adds up to 99%. So the other parts are very, very little. Plus particulate matter. If you have allergies and you breathe in pollen, it gets stuck in your nose. That's particulate matter. It's possible particulate matter gets past that. And that's one of the topics we'll deal with today, is what happens if these things get down into your trachea, for example. In terms of what we exhale, or exhalation, expiration, we don't do anything with the nitrogen. That's just the biggest part of air. 78% comes in, basically 78% goes out. Oxygen, you would think that we take all the oxygen out, but that's not true either. We take out maybe 5%. So the oxygen could be still at 16%, somewhere in that range. And that's why CPR works, because if you're breathing air into a person, there has to be enough oxygen in that air to help them. And there's particulate matter, probably not. There's a little bit of carbon dioxide gets exhaled, obviously, because it comes from the system, and maybe we're looking at 4%, maybe up to 5% carbon dioxide. But doing a little bit of math here, we're already up to 98%, so the remaining parts of air, very, very little. What we have to look at then in the system is what happens to change this. The biggest change is right here. Right? Oxygen, oxygen, and carbon dioxide. That's the biggest change. Plus, what happened to the particulate matter? The purpose of this whole system is to get the oxygen into the body so our cells can use it. Unfortunately, we have to deal with particulate matter along the way. The oxygen doesn't get used to down here, or until it gets into the blood down here, so that's not part of our topic in this video. Neither is the carbon dioxide. That comes up later. But let's look at specializations. Specialization to rid the airways of the particulate matter. And there's two of them. One of them we're dealing with in the nose. And quite simply, it's the nose hairs and mucus. When you breathe things in, the nose hairs act like filters and they catch things, and the mucus, they're wet so that they get stuck on the nose hairs, and of course that creates a deposit in the nose which can be removed. It is possible to inhale that deposit, I suppose, and it gets past your nose. And when it gets past your nose, it gets down into your trachea, into your pharynx first, the back of your throat, and you swallow it goes to your stomach, which is fine, and it'll get digested down there. But if it gets into your trachea, there's another specialization. If this represents the trachea, same as the nose, same as all the airways, are covered with mucus. So I'll make mucus purple here. And I'll exaggerate another structure. These inner walls of the trachea have cilia. And I'm exaggerating the cilia here because cilia are really microscopic protein fibers, but to explain their function here, I'll just exaggerate this thing. So these are cilia. Now what happens here is if you don't swallow the particulate matter and it gets past your nose into your trachea, you're inhaling it, and it's possible it gets past there and even into the bronchi, the larger bronchi. It could even get down into here. It's going to get, sooner or later, it's going to get stuck in the mucus. Sooner or later it will get stuck. And it gets trapped by mucus. And the role of the cilia is to beat, like a paramecium's totally covered with cilia, and by its beating actions, moving action, it moves the paramecium. Well here, you're not going to move the trachea, but by the cilia moving, they move in a gentle upwards manner like this. They're constantly pushing mucus up your trachea. It gets up your trachea to the back of your throat, into your pharynx. And when you get that there, the natural reaction is to swallow. And you think about it, how many times you sit there and you swallow every day and you're not even eating food. But the mucus is being driven up your trachea and you're swallowing it. So particulate matter that may be caught in the trachea is trapped by the mucus and moved anteriorly. I have to say anteriorly because regardless of body direction, if you're laying down, it's still going towards your head. I can't say it's being moved up, but in general, we think it is being moved up. We think of it as being moved up. So what we have now, we've got the air going in, we've removed particulate matter from it, and we're getting the air coming down in here. There's a couple of other things that happen to the air. And I'll just put that in this little box here. Changes to the air that gets inhaled. One particulate matter is removed. Second thing that happens is the temperature is adjusted, because outside it could be 5 degrees. It could be 25 degrees. It could be 80 degrees in the Fahrenheit scale. So by the time you get into your system, 2 degrees or 5 degrees or 80 degrees or whatever temperature is no good, because down here, this is 37 degrees Celsius. That's body temperature, roughly 37 degrees. So the temperature is adjusted. And the third thing that happens is water is added to it. It becomes almost 100% humidity. The water, if you make the connection here, the water is going to be coming out of the mucus as well. So the cells along the trachea and along the bronchi and bronchioles are constantly secreting water, and that water forms the mucus here, which gets driven up. But at the same time as the air is being pulled down, it's increasing. Increasing in humidity becomes 100% humid. So I think that sets the stage for what happens next in the system. What happens when we get the air down into here. And I just realized I can mention one more thing about the trachea. I should mention it here. It's a specialization of the trachea and of the bronchi and larger bronchioles that doesn't exist in other parts of the body for the same purpose. And it is quite simply the cartilage rings around the trachea. If you touch your trachea, that's your trachea in front, you can feel the hardness of the cartilage rings. And what that's actually doing is protecting the trachea from collapse, because air gets drawn in. The trachea itself, the flesh of the trachea, is a soft tube. And if you were to draw something in through a soft tube, the tube would collapse. So the function, quite simply, of the cartilage rings around the trachea and the bronchi and larger bronchioles is to prevent collapse of the trachea when you're inhaling. So this has to stay open. The airways have to stay open like that. The cartilage rings are C-shaped because right behind the trachea is the esophagus. And as you swallow food, you have to be able to allow peristalsis to happen. And peristalsis puts pressure on the back of the trachea, and the C-shaped cartilage rings allow that pressure to happen so you can swallow and breathe, but you don't want to do both of those at the same time. So I think that sets our stage for our next topics. We have to look next, in the next video, at alveoli structure and function, because we have to understand what goes on down here. We know how the air gets to here, but we have to understand this structure so that we can deal with the processes, then deal with the process of breathing, the mechanics of breathing, like exactly what's going on to let the air come in and let the air go out, and also the gas transport in blood. After oxygen gets into blood, bonds to hemoglobin, it gets to the cells, what happens in the blood as far as gas transport is concerned. So those are upcoming videos. Thanks very much.